Hi, my name is Anita Amstutz, and welcome to the Watershed Food and Bees, Honeybees, uh, film and introduction today. I wanted to just share who I am. My name is Anita Amstutz, and I founded Think Like a Bee in 2015, which is a nonprofit advocacy and educational nonprofit for bees and pollination, everything. And I've worked with in schools and communities and with the city. And we also created Berkey Bee City with New Mexico Beekeepers Association, which is a wonderful, that's why we're having this celebration, because of Berkey Bee City designation that we got in 2018. And it is a way that we can recognize the incredible diversity of bees that we have here. There's bees that are indigenous to New Mexico, over 1,000 out of 4,000 in North America. 1,000 are here, or over 1,000. They're still discovering them. And we have so many pollinators that come through here and that live here, and honeybees are one of those, and that's Apis mellifera is the scientific name. So I'm a honeybee keeper, or haver, I guess you would say. I'm not, I did go through the certified beekeeper program with New Mexico Beekeepers, and I learned a lot about not only honeybees, but also about habitat and how do we take care of the land and the soil and the air so that pollinators are healthy and that we are healthy and that our food systems are good to go. So in 2015, shortly before I founded Think Like a Bee, which calls us to think like a bee, how do we think with a hive mind, like a super organism, which works together to make the best possible life for the community of all. So I was meeting some new people as I was going to found this nonprofit, and one of them was named Lorenzo Candelaria, and he would be at the farmers market locally here. And Lorenzo had a farm, an organic farm down in the South Valley that he had been at with over 300 years. His family had had land along the waterways, the acequias in the river, and the Atrisco land grant. And he said, come visit me, come see what I'm doing down here with my farm. So I did, and I ended up seeing that he was a master of soil. His fascination and passion is how you create healthy soil so you have healthy food, and then how that healthy food then is available for the community at large so that we can have better diets and be happier, healthier people. So I put my bees down there, and we've had a wonderful collaboration, and we're going to watch a short clip from a video series that Think Like a Bee did in 2018, where we interviewed farmers along the Rio Grande and also indigenous leaders. So what we're going to learn about today is watershed. And watershed is critical. Integrity of a watershed is, and the ecosystem and the diversity of a watershed is what allows us to thrive as human beings and all life that lives in that watershed. What is a watershed? You'll learn a little bit more as you hear Lorenzo as we interview him and visit his farm where I have my bees. But a watershed is an area of land that drains snowfall and snow melt and rainfall into the streams and rivers that run through that land. And it is a geographical region. So we live in the middle Rio Grande watershed, and the Rio Grande watershed begins up near Creede and southwestern Colorado, comes down through northern New Mexico. We're in the middle Rio Grande and heads down towards Mexico. And often it just doesn't even make it to the Mexican border because of the heavy use in our cities, agriculture, industry. So it's important that for healthy pollinators, we have to ensure that our watersheds have ecological diversity, because bees, whether they're bees that are native to this part of the country or honeybees, are keystone species. And what does keystone species mean? Keystone means that if those species are healthy and they have the diversity of habitat that they need, then we all will be healthy. If they are not, and the watershed is polluted or abused or degraded or overly developed, then we will have an unhealthy watershed. So part of what we did with Berkey Bee City in 2016 is that we ensured that our city is aware, and we're working together to create happy and healthy corridors for pollinators in our neighborhoods, in our public spaces, our parks, reduced pesticide and insecticide use, always paying attention to having native plants and habitat, spring, summer, and fall, and when pollinators need to eat before they leave or hibernate or migrate. And also Berkey Bee City invites you as people who live in neighborhoods and have neighborhood associations that you're a part of to work with the city, get funding from your city councilors, and try to create healthy habitat, that pollinators can survive and thrive on. And General John Wesley Powell was a one-armed Civil War veteran. And in the 19th century, he rafted down the Colorado River many times, actually, and into the Grand Canyon. And he was fascinated by this wild river. And in seeing the arid landscape of the West and our arid climate, his belief, and he said this to the Congress at that time of the US federal government, you should organize towns and settlements in the West around watersheds, not artificial boundaries like states, like they do in the East. We didn't do that, unfortunately. If we had, we would not have areas like, we would have big cities like LA or Phoenix, or even probably Albuquerque. We would have small settlements that are really tied deeply to their watersheds. And what would it mean to have watersheds be the way we're organized? Well, it would mean that you can only take within the limitation and boundary of that watershed. You can't deplete it. You can't abuse it, pollute it, destroy it, because you're not going to be able to beg, steal, borrow, and horse trade water upstream or downstream. You're going to have to live within the boundaries of your watershed and ensure that integrity. And that never happened. And so today we do have water wars, and there might be more water wars as we face drought. And that is a threat for pollinators as well as humans. One of the persons we also interviewed was Phoebe Sweeney, who is a water engineer with the Cochiti Pueblo. And she said, guess what? We've been here through 3 governments, the Spanish, the Mexican, and now with the US. And she said, we're still here. And we still are strategically thinking 7 generations forward, how we as a community understand the best possible way to live in our watershed. So all creatures, all plants, what they call the indigenous encyclopedia, is alive and healthy and thriving. And so I love that, because Phoebe Sweeney works very closely with Western policymakers and Western engineers with indigenous ways of being and how we think like a watershed. So they are working also towards ensuring a healthy watershed and the integrity of our middle Rio Grande. That's where the Cochiti Pueblo is working. Between the 19 pueblos up and down the river, they are almost central to that. So we're going to watch the video. It's called Harvesting Consciousness, and it's an interview with Lorenzo Candelario, one of the farmers we introduced or interviewed. And think about, what does harvesting consciousness mean? Because Lorenzo Candelaria of Cornelio Candelaria Organico harvests lots of other vegetables and fruits as well, but he always says, I harvest consciousness here. So think about that as you watch this. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to listen to this.
Agriculture for just as long. All my relations come, every nation come, all my relations under the sun. We are one. Buenos dias, my name is Lorenzo Candelaria. This is Cornelio Candelaria Organic. I'm 7th generation Atrisco farmer. And the water that we use from our beautiful Rio Grande has been a lifeline for thousands and thousands of years. And it's been used for agriculture for just as long. These lands here that were at the foot of this hill became cobbles that were mixed with the sand from erosion off of the hill and the sediment of the river to create very, very fertile lands. And these people that lived up there 1,000 years prior to the Spanish farmed this land to produce our three sisters, the corn, the squash, and the beans, and the tobacco, which is very important. Mother Earth has been providing sustenance for humankind for that length of time, makes this soil sacred. The main diversion on the Rio Grande is about 1/8 of a mile up, so we're right next to the river. And I think there are 4 major arteries. This is the westernmost one. This is the Arenal Acequia. When I was growing up, all of this infrastructure here that you see was all earthen dam, and we had to pull up the beams to raise the water and lower the water. So it was very manual and very hard work. You know, it was tough labor. Now we have solar panels that open and close the gates, and all we got to do is push a button. It's not that easy, but these ditches, what they do is they deliver water to our fields, you know, and it's a system that works totally on gravity. It has no pumps, and that technology was brought here by the Spanish via the Moors. They occupied Spain for 500 years. They established schools called Almuñas, a place of relaxation and experimentation. And by that means, these people learned to bring agricultural goods, agricultural methods, agricultural technologies. And 500 years ago, the Spanish brought it here. Okay. And it's still in use today in basically the same form. In the near future, I see problems in the fact that there are developments going up way up in the desert where they want to pump water from the Rio Grande Basin, from the watershed. And there's no water here. This is the desert after all. So in order to supply a community, or I think they said 38,000 habitations, where are they going to get the water? It's right here, folks. So that means that I'm out of business after having farmed with this ditch for 300 years. And we're going to end up with no food. And the loss of our culture and our language and our traditions that are established and surrounded around this system of water. Our water is very sacred to us. So it's frightening to think of what could happen if that whole development takes effect.
Hi, my name is Anita Amstutz, and I started a nonprofit called Think Like a Bee in 2015.
Have you ever eaten these? Taste it.
And I did that as a beekeeper because I felt that we needed to have more advocacy and more education around pollinators and bees in this part of the world, in the Southwest. 1 year after all of our bees had crashed, we were really disheartened. And that spring, Lorenzo noticed that there were bees coming in out of one of those old broken down hives. For us, that was a sign that the bees will continue here. This one, I'm not really sure we want to take much honey from because
they're not putting any on top.
Yeah, they're not putting any on top. This one has a little bit on top. So you want that pattern of
honey, pollen, and brood.
This is one of the most essential creatures that we have in our agriculture. And you can see what happens when monocropping takes place, where pesticides and chemical fertilizers are used, that the bee populations just don't make it.
We douse our food systems and our environment with chemicals that bees are sensitive to, as we are. It's in the water, the air, the soil. We're finding climate change is a huge predictor of bee colony collapse, because not only patterns of drought, changing seasons that we can't really understand. They might come out too early. They might eat their food too fast. The stores that they have saved up. The extreme heat here is just incredible. I mean, we have over 100 degrees in the summers now. Loss of habitat. That's also a huge indicator of bee colony collapse. They don't have a queen and her pheromones to kind of mellow out the hive and know that everything's okay and they're doing good. Actually, they have put honey in this top pouches of all of these, so it's pretty good.
They're amazing creatures. Their method of communication is much, much more efficient than ours. Their vocabulary consists of one word, and that's survival.
And so what do they need for survival?
Water. Water.
The Rio Grande watershed is very rich in terms of habitat for all pollinators and all creatures and all farmers who live along the Rio Grande and use this watershed.
Their survival and our survival all depend on the water. If it's a low water year in the acequias and in the river, of course, the vegetation isn't as plentiful as it is on wetter years. This year, because we've had sufficient water, both on the bosque and in the ditches that crisscross the valley, the habitat has been able to flourish and feed the bees.
They're getting slightly aggravated, yeah. Oh, you can see the luminous quality of this honey. It's glorious. Thank you, girls. Grateful for letting us in and not stinging us today.
Not one.
They were so mellow today. That was just really a pleasure to be tending them, and that's not always the case.
It gets wild.
We're at Cornelio Candelaria Organics with Don Lorenzo Candelaria and Doña Dora Pasillas. We are in the tent, washroom, fridge / kitchen area where we are making some fixings for some tacos to celebrate one of our compañeros' birthday, Mateo Carrasco. I've been facilitating young people working at this farm for the last 7 years or so. Lorenzo's family's been on this farm for 300 plus years. So it's just kind of an honor to carry on that legacy of keeping the land, stewarding the land, keep growing food, but really bring these guys here to meet Don Lorenzo, to talk with them, to have that intergenerational mentorship is really the most important thing for us.
Part of the effort that Anita and I have made with our students to teach them the only one thing that we truly harvest is consciousness. It's not a school, it's not an institution. It's a way to communicate to children, and that is by respecting the Mother Earth, the water that we're made of, and the effort of working with the living creatures like the bee or the plant is all part of what Mother Earth transmits to us as energy. Your energy, your life energy is the same life energy that we have. It's just as alive as you are. And when you interact with it, when you touch it, when you groom it, there's an energy exchange. El poder de la Madre Tierra puede ser transferido a nuestros cuerpos para sanar.
The older generations, our indigenous people, and our Chicano communities that have been growing food here for hundreds and hundreds of years with the acequias and with the community, we got to get back to it, because honestly, those things were taken away from us. And so that's what we're really trying to do in the next couple of years, try to solidify this farm as a historical, traditional agroecology center or a learning center, an almunia. And that's what Lorenzo really instilled in us. Is it's an ancient concept of experimentation through agriculture and agroecology, as well as a place of relaxation and healing for the community to come together.
Siéntala, siéntala energía.
Oh, yes, you're beautiful.
I wasn't born on this farm. I was born on my grandmother's ranch. And my parents had returned from Oakland after my father was discharged from the service. That was during the Dust Bowl period of time where people were migrating through Albuquerque. And when they got here, this house was abandoned, so people squatted in it and left it in ruin. The house was not habitable. And my mother was pregnant with me. She went down to stay with my grandmother. Her pregnancy only lasted 7 months. And this was out in the middle of nowhere. It was 200 miles from nothing. The only amenities that my grandmother had on that farm were her horno de adobe and the windmill for water. Later on in life, I had an opportunity to speak with her about that experience. And she told me the love, the honor, the respect, and the duty that you have to your mother is the same as you should have for your Mother Earth. Because it was from both wombs that I drew you into the light. And so what I do here is the transmission of that philosophy, that idea that this is sacred, what we stand on is sacred. My very, very first contact with music was the water. How it registered in my mind and how it had cadence and rhythm. And so the earliest memories that I have of music are on the acequia. And the acequia is still a major part of my life, which is fascinating to me because of my age, that I have been doing this for this length of time and still enjoying it and still hearing the music in the water and still feeling the energy in the earth and tasting the goodness of what it produces. So I'm a very happy man at this stage in life because I've always done what I want to do, and I'm very happy doing it.
We are one. We are the river calm. We are the river calm. We are the boat, the paddle.
So, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that, and I want to give a shout out to both Lorenzo Candelaria of Cornelio Candelaria Organico Farm, and also Travis Mackenzie, who he and I and Lorenzo and Dora Pasillas actually have taught generations of students and children for many, many years. I just came maybe in the last few years, but teaching them about what it is to harvest consciousness. And a shout out to Peter Walker and his students at the Digital Media Arts program in Taos. So there, you hear him talking about harvesting consciousness, and what does that mean? How do we think about our own relationship with Mother Earth? And I think that is what Lorenzo is asking us to consider, is that maybe our tribe, all our relations are not only our human relations, our blood relations, but it might be the planet and the earth as well. And how do we foster a relationship of apprenticing our own minds and hearts to everything around us that is alive? You know, everything is alive. The bees, the flowers, the trees, all the animals, the rivers, the soil is teeming with microbes that help us grow good food, good grapes for wine. You know, Wendell Berry, who is a Kentucky tobacco farmer and as well as philosopher and well-known poet, has said, in a speech, he talked about how it all turns on affection, and he borrowed it from 1910 it was a novel by W.H. Forster. But it all turns on affection means, how do we have affection for the land and the places that we live, and foster and apprentice ourselves so that we have a relationship of affection with everything that is living around us, as well as our watershed. So I wanted to open it up for questions. If there are any questions that you might be putting those in the comment box as you're watching this. I want to see if there's any. What can food honeybees teach us specifically about our symbiotic relationship with nature? Yeah, that's a very good question. Honeybees, which are particularly grown, I guess you would say, domesticated, although we can't quite domesticate them. As I said, they're wild, for agriculture. They teach us that without them, we will not have the food system that we are so used to. They say 1 in 3 bites, or almost 75% of our food, is pollinated gratis of honeybees. And so they're absolutely essential to the food we eat and the kinds of dishes that we enjoy, and our favorite fruits. And for instance, avocados and all of the fruits, you know, they are not self-pollinating. They need pollinators to make that special pollination magic happen. I wanted to also say that honeybees are social democracy. Thomas Seeley, who's a scientist and also teaches about honeybees as a social democracy, it's very interesting because he says they teach us about how we can work together to solve problems. And I think Lorenzo spoke to the fact that they're great communicators. You know, survival is their first, most important word, but they work together, especially when they are trying to find a new place to live, a swarm. In the spring, the honeybee hive will split as they expand and outgrow their space. Half of them will need to leave with the old queen and find a new zip code, a new home. And part of that comes from the scout honeybees going out and finding new places where they're measuring these new places where they could all fit in. Half the hive could fit in. They'll be safe. They will be not too hot, not too cold, protected, have enough sunlight. And they come back and they do something called a waggle dance, which is a really quick dance around the hive. And so the scout bees will basically bring this information, the specs of the new place, back to the whole hive, and they will decide together which one they want to move to. So that democratization and that ability to make consensual decisions together is an interesting thing they found about the social nature. What we know, we need plants for pollinators. What about as water dries up? How does that affect the bees? Water is life, and when the bees when there's no water, there is no life, there is no habitat. And so we've seen very clearly in dry years, or we had a very dry winter, there's not enough habitat in the springs, and our bees will probably have more diseases. They'll have less immune system response, and they won't be able to put as much food up for the winter. My motto is you never take more than you need. So you go into the hive, the principle of harvesting is that you just take half for me, half for the bees. And so you never overtake, and you make sure they have enough for the winter. And if there's still some in the spring, you can harvest that then, but you don't over harvest. And that's another principle of a good watershed. You don't over harvest water. You make sure there's enough water in the watershed. How can people support local bee populations or protect them? Well, that is really about planting habitat, but not habitat that come from plants with GMO. You know, a lot of plants have been engineered or modified now, and they've had even pesticides or insecticides injected into the seed itself. And that is deadly for bees, or the plant has changed, the seed has changed so radically. So you can find native plant species at your local plant growers, local plant nurseries. We've been working, and Wild Friends of New Mexico has been working with those plant nurseries, local ones, to really give out lists and make sure they're stocked with plants that are indigenous to the high desert we live in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. I also want to say that Burnco Library, it's down on Broadway Avenue near Cesar Chavez, and that Broadway Cultural Center actually has a library branch in it that you can buy heirloom seeds or seeds that are healthy, you know, native seeds that are good for this part of the world. So you can actually not purchase them, but you can go and you can ask for those seeds and go and grow them in your yard. So check it out. We continue to work with the city around pesticides, and they're really working to have a good integrated pest management policy, especially on public property, parks, and our public median strips and whatnot. But if you do see something that you're concerned about, please call your city councilor, or you can call myself, and we continue to be in touch with city parks and rec and solid waste and the biopark. Some of those groups are the ones who kind of manage and oversee our public spaces. But for you, there are definitely options. And I know they had a YouTube video on this pollinator festival that shows you an alternative to spraying with pesticides. It's like a vinegar, and you can use gardener's vinegar or white vinegar with rock salt and ordinary dish detergent, and make a solution that will, you know, kill plants that you don't want without being harmful to pollinators. How important it is. Well, I also want to say one last thing about the Berkey Bee City resolution that was passed in 2016. One of the key points in there gives neighborhoods the power, actually, to work with your neighborhood associations and your city councilors for your neighborhoods to ensure, healthy pollinator habitat, maybe secure funding, maybe create corridors or swaths for pollinators. That's part of what we want to do. Just as the city is doing it, we as citizens want to increase pollinator habitat in our backyards and in our neighborhoods. Last question, how important do I think it is to teach youth about these types of concepts? Absolutely important. You can see in the very final clip of the documentary that Travis McKenzie is talking with young people. And on this farm alone, there have been generations of school children and adults who have come to plant and harvest and learn and harvest consciousness about the food and where the food comes from and how we need to tend it and how we need to tend our watershed to have healthy, nutritious food. And so if we teach our young people, I know we've had students that are part of our summer youth intern projects who have said, if I hadn't been part of this summer youth farmer internship, I would have been at home playing video games all summer. Or I would have never learned where our food comes from, or I would have never seen a real tomato or a real carrot. And so it's absolutely critical for our young people to learn about where our food comes from and pollinators and all the, everything that the cycle of life, I guess you would say, so that we can have a thriving and sustainable future and take care of our watershed, because we do have to think like a watershed, think like a bee for 7 generations forward as our indigenous elders and communities teach us. So thank you again for all of you who came out and watched today. I hope that you will continue to garden, plant native plants, attract honeybees as well as bees that are indigenous to this part of the country, because they are so beautiful and there's so many, many thousands of them here, at least 1,000 that we know about in New Mexico. So continue on and apprentice yourself to something wild and learn to love what you live, what you share this watershed with. I'm going to end with this wonderful quote from Baba Dioum. Baba Dioum was a Senegalese engineer and the Ministry of Forestry, and in 1968 at an international forum, he said, "In the end, we will only conserve what we love. We will only love what we understand, and we will only understand what we are taught." And so teach your children well, learn yourself about this beautiful, magnificent, and wondrous world we live in, and enjoy the pollinators this summer.